In Mumbai city, when that was not happening, there was a clamor for the policemen to go and kill the mafia men. I believe some scores of people were eliminated, and there's also a film, Ab Tak Chappan, I also saw that. But that's not the way. That's not the way civilized society should function. There should be real rule of law. And justice is really covering all these civil and criminal issues. The third is opportunities for vertical mobility. We want for every citizen, irrespective of the circumstances of birth, the caste, region, religion, and so on and so forth, and of course class, minimum opportunity for vertical mobility, education, healthcare, infrastructure. And there are reasons why we are not able to do as much as we should do. In the past 55, 58 years after independence, undoubtedly India has done quite a bit. If we don't acknowledge that, then we are being somewhat short-sighted. The work done in the past half a century is not to be cavilled at. But all of us are somewhat unhappy because, considering the potential of this country, our realization is well short of the expectation. We could do a lot more. It's not that we haven't done it all. We have done quite a bit, but we could do a lot more. And this gulf is what makes us angry. And that's what makes many people in civil society take up causes in their own way. But what is the heart of the problem? Why is it that it's not happening? Because nobody can make out a case that you and I can do what the government ought to do. After all, the state is there to fulfill our felt needs. The state is taking our taxes. It is assuming authority on our behalf as our agent with our consent, duly expressed through electoral and other processes. And therefore, if the state machinery doesn't do what it ought to do, for me to try and do what the state ought to have done will mean wastage of resources and disproportionate effort for limited outcomes. So ultimately the state must do its job. And our political process has now come to a standstill. It is very dynamic in the sense that it changes governments rapidly. The people in power are never certain that they would be re-elected. Half the incumbents are getting thrown out in every election. But it's completely stagnant in the sense that it doesn't make any difference at all. No matter who is elected, the people lose. There's change of place, but there's no change of the rules of the game. And I think the civil society must now graduate to the third level. From the pilots to institutional replication in a viable and sustainable manner to governance itself. Looking at India so that what we are entitled to as citizens, we get, and there's best value for the money. And the way I look at it is, I think we have to graduate to the second and third phases now. I think we must forget ourselves as NGOs or some other things. We must go to the issue of citizenship. We have in India people, consumers, clients, Aam Janata, but not citizens. I think sometimes even many of the civil society organizations, we fall into this trap of creating this client-based relationship. He doesn't do the job, already I'll do the job. Now you come to me, kind of a thing. Therefore dependence, instead of on the My Baap Sarkar, on the My Baap NGO. Bangladesh is a classic example of where some of the NGOs, some of the best NGOs in the world, they're actually doing what the government ought to have done. Now, when things have completely collapsed in society, I suppose that's necessary. Some people say Bangladesh is more or less a failed state. 2 days ago, even the External Affairs Secretary, he said, look, we have failed states all around in South Asia. You better pull up your socks and look at India as an opportunity, not as a threat. But that's a larger issue. The point is, if we also merely aspire to be substitutes to government, that's not a very smart thing. We must make people citizens, active participants in the governance process, and therefore help them take up this collective informed assertion to make things better. Because ultimately the ball rests with the citizens. Ultimately we are the sovereigns. And therefore if Mumbai city things are bad, it's we the citizens of Mumbai that are responsible in the final analysis. Somebody who is our agent is misperforming. Now it's for me as a principal to correct that, somebody. So it's really an employer-employee relationship in that sense. That includes the chief minister. That includes the chief secretary. It includes the commissioner of police. It includes the small minion in government. So unless we reshape our thinking and start believing that we are citizens and therefore sovereigns and therefore ultimately people responsible, I don't think we'll go far. That is at one level. The second level is the whole issue of governance can be addressed by one simple measure, and that is bringing the government as close to citizens as possible. In 50 years, if there is one thing we have done spectacularly wrong, That was to take the government as distant as possible from the citizen, as remote as possible from the citizen. And I don't have to explain why the moment there are a number of chains, the weakest link becomes the strength of the chain. And therefore, if 99 links are wonderful, one link is enough to destroy everything. Therefore, simple common sense tells us, make sure that the money spent by the citizen in the form of taxes is utilized as close to citizen as possible. There is a link between taxes and services. Make sure that if I give a vote, then there is a link between that vote and the translation of my expectation into genuine public good after the election. Again, that happens as locally as possible. Make sure that authority and accountability fuse. One remarkable feature in government in India is you go to anybody, everybody comes out as a wonderful human being. Every chief minister is nice, every minister is nice, every secretary to government is nice, collector is nice. No, they're all nice people. One to one, you actually see that they feel the same way as you and I do. But the outcomes are radically different from our expectations. So we have a classic system of alibis. Everybody is good, but somewhere something is wrong. That's because authority and accountability in India have never fused. Somebody has the power, somebody else has the responsibility, and these two things are never merged. And again, that fusion is possible only locally. And the fourth is, we have completely divorced stakeholding from power wielding. If I have the stakes, if I need the Mumbai city transport, if I don't have some say in managing the city transport, if somebody who would never use that is the person who is actually controlling it, the chances are that it will never be effectively managed. Because people who don't really care for the outcomes, who are not affected by the outcomes at a personal level, are not likely to improve them beyond a point. If the person in charge of Mumbai hospitals doesn't really care for the care in the hospitals, he has a better system elsewhere, the chances are that he would not really improve the hospitals. This is normal human nature. It applies to you, it applies to me, it applies to every human being. Therefore, combination of stakeholding and power wielding. I think as a society and as a civil society, all of us must look at these things. How do we re-establish these links? Not as sarkar that is different from us, distant from us and remote from us, but that is us. The principle of subsidiarity, that things must be done as close to people as possible, in a way that is economically prudent and technically viable. And if you don't do it that way, I have no doubt that things will go back. In other words, we have to start reinventing government. This whole notion that there is somebody there external to us, that must go. I completely disagree with that notion. It's like saying I don't want to work with my family. For me as a citizen, as a human being, the closest universe to me which affects most of my life's interests is my family. Your happiness, my happiness, in a significant measure depends not on what happens in Delhi or Hyderabad or Mumbai, but what happens in our own homes. Now, can I say that I don't care for my family? Then I am certainly buying unhappiness for myself and for the family, both. That loneliness, it doesn't give me autonomy, it actually makes me miserable. Now, the next level of government to me after the family is a community of stakeholders. That is government. There is no government in Mantralaya in Mumbai. There is a government, a community of stakeholders. The school, for instance, if my kids go to school, to me, the government must be envisioned in a manner that the parents whose kids are at school constitute the committee to govern the school, because they are the most affected parties. Now, can I say I don't care for the school management and yet I expect good outcome in terms of education for my child? Doesn't make any sense. I negotiate. I try and play a role. I actually participate. If they don't facilitate the participation, at least I demand and sit with them across the table. Otherwise, if that voice is not there, my child is the one who is suffering. Take a hospital. If I say I don't care what the hospital does, and yet when there is an emergency, my wife has to be under the knife of a surgeon, and I don't know about the surgeon's competence, or his corruption, or is inebriated, or is sober when he is operating, is it a very sane position? So I have to find out what's happening there. Therefore, the community of stakeholders has tremendous interest in the services that are delivered. Next is the local government, the Mumbai city or the ward. Next is the state, next is the national government. Therefore, this whole notion that government is external to us or away from environment must give way to a notion that government actually starts with our home and with the neighborhood, the community of stakeholders, the local, the state and the national one.